Chapter 17. Saying Goodbye. We continued hiking on trail that wound mostly downhill. The loose, gravelly rock made walking difficult, and I had to be extremely careful not to slide. More than once I lost my footing on shale that turned into a small landslide. I landed on my rear end. Instead of helping me up, Nelida scolded me for being clumsy. We came to a hut hidden in the underbrush. I expressed bewilderment that anyone would live in the desert so far from the nearest town. By now you ought to know that sorcerers' houses are found where one least expected them, she said. You mean sorcerers live here? I said, stopping in my tracks. They do. We'll spend the night here and hike back early the next morning. Tomorrow, our 3-day interlude will be over. I began rubbing my eyes, and I told her that I cherished my time with her and did not want it to come to an end. Don't indulge in sentimentality. You know that it's in the nature of things to come to an end. Fortunately, we already said goodbye. I assured her that I never had said any such thing. To cling is indulging, she said firmly, and walked to the door of the hut. You're riding on the sorcerer's power now. When you return to Los Angeles, you'll have to rely on your own power. Therefore, you must behave impeccably, or else the bird of freedom will fly away, and you will be left feeling sorry for yourself under the tree. Nelida's words gave me a sobering jolt. The thought that the spirit would fly away and I would never see her again was more frightening than anything I could imagine. We entered the adobe hut. It was cool inside. The single room was sparsely furnished. Only a mattress with a folded blanket and a carved wooden trunk lined the walls. A table and 2 orange crates set on their sides were in the center of the room. Nelida sat on the mattress and brought her knees to her chest and folded her arms around them, a position she had taught me to assume whenever I wanted to relax. The bent legs covered the energy centers along the front of the body and prevented energy from dissipating through agitation. We are in the hands of power, and we must humbly accept what it offers us. She continued in a gentler tone. We control nothing and must not cling. For in the circular course of things, the end is always one with the beginning. But how do we know when the end will come, or if there will be another beginning? I asked. Nelida straightened her long legs and looked at me squarely. You prepare for the end by always saying goodbye at the beginning. You do this naturally, with as much flair and affection as if you were saying hello. Something was forming in my thoughts. I saw what was coming, yet there was no power on earth to avert it. If I kept on talking, perhaps there was something I could hold on to after she was gone, if only her words. I told her that I didn't understand how one could always be saying goodbye when one didn't know when one was leaving. But don't you see, Taisha? You are leaving all the time. Every moment you are leaving one thing to embrace something else. The very act of going to something new means that you are saying farewell to that which you have left behind. If you say, or you never say your piece and voice your thanks, if you continually cling to what has passed, how can you ever have the energy to accept the marvelous present? What exactly do you mean by clinging? I asked doggedly, following her to the table. Nelida explained that clinging was both a mental attitude end a physical sensation. Mentally, one is drawn back again and again to something that is no longer in one's immediate surroundings. Physically, one becomes constricted as one holds on to ideas or memories that are illusory. Both mental and physical constrictions reinforce each other, so that one is unable to open willingly and accept fully the new challenges that continually present themselves. If you cling, you are plagued with a sense of loss and longing, Nelida remarked, sitting down on one of the orange crates. So you always feel unfulfilled. It would be much wiser not to cling, but to simply let go. Then you won't feel that you have lost anything, for you have already made full use of whatever it was that left. My advice is to never hold on to anything beyond its time or your time. Nelida explained that saying goodbye at the same time as saying hello is the stalker's art of recognizing and accepting life's impermanence. Nothing ever remains the same, but constant change could not affect a seasoned stalker. For when change comes, he or she is ready. How can we be ready for change when we don't know what will happen next or where it will happen? Nelida grabbed my hand that was rubbing my eyes, slapping it as one would slap a child. She said I must not rub in my agitation, but allow the energy in my eyes to flow out freely. As stalkers, we are ready for change, Nelida continued in an even tone, because we accept our fate, which is to evolve. We are able to shift our awareness easily and smoothly to match the events that are shifting around us. By being one with the moment, a stalker does not notice the change and never feels a loss. Thus, our lives are always full and yet remain forever an open-ended question mark. I would feel more secure if our lives were contained in closed brackets, I mumbled. That is because you have grown accustomed to your prison bars. But when your life is a constant question mark, there is no telling what you are capable of doing. Perhaps even escaping the ultimate exclamation point, our death. What if you love someone or want something you can't have? I argued. Then you are bound to feel disappointed or cheated. Nelida shook her head. You never want anything you can't have, she replied. Just as you never want anything you can have. By recapitulating your life and practicing not doing, you change your attitude. And by that I mean, your mind becomes fluid, so you cling to nothing. Then, whatever comes your way is more than enough. Nor do you expect anything to last. Then, whatever withdraws from you has stayed longer than its time. But your intrinsic energy never stays or leaves. But you said we will have to leave tomorrow, I protested. I might never see you again. Nelida stood up and paused at the small window cut into the adobe. Perhaps you will be gone, but I will never have to leave this desert. How can that be? Simply because I was never here. I shivered. Nelida said this with such certainty that even if I wanted to doubt her, I couldn't. Impulsively, I embraced her. She was solid, and yet indescribably empty to the touch. When I closed my eyes, I could no longer feel her. I realized then that her presence in the room depended on visual and auditory clues that were, to a large extent, based on my memory of her, rather than on her actual existence. That thought gave me a jolt of genuine fright. Instinctively, I moved backwards a few steps. To be here and not here at the same time is what sorcerers mean by stalking with the double, Nelida said. It means that being is no more real than not being. There you go again, talking in riddles again, I said, afraid she would vanish at any moment. She looked at me as if impatient with my inability to understand. It means, she continued when she saw in my face genuine confusion, that not being here is as real as being here. The fact that this desert or this hut is something that surrounds me, something that I love profoundly, cannot be denied. But if another scene surrounds me, I will love it as deeply, for the feeling of affection is inside me, and only in the scene for as long as I choose to place it here. She looked at me solemnly. It's true, I take my awareness and energy with me wherever I go, she said. I leave nothing behind. You, on the other hand, leave everything behind like a comet. Anyone can follow your trail. I call that lousy stalking. How can you not be and yet still feel affection? I asked. That is the riddle of the heart that takes stalkers a lifetime to unravel, she said. Someday you will understand it. She took 2 china cups from a shelf and set them on the table, along with a teapot. I was surprised to see that they were made of exquisitely fine porcelain, so out of place in an adobe shack. Their unexpected presence gave me a true jolt, and I imagined for a moment that Nelida had plucked them out of the air, for I had not noticed them on the shelf upon entering the room. On a portable kerosene stove, she set water to boil. As she prepared tea, I lifted up one of the cups to examine it. The blue and white porcelain was delicately shaped with a willow pattern design. I wondered if the tea set was an antique from the Ming dynasty, in which case it was priceless. So much for sorcerers not being interested in personal possessions, I thought. Nelida answered my unvoiced question, saying she had acquired the tea set during her travels in the Orient. She added that it really didn't matter how valuable it was or how old it was, because for her, it was always here and always now. Nelida filled my cup with tea with an aromatic blossom in it. This cup that was empty moments before is now filled with tea, she said as she put down the pot. Or you can fill it with whatever substance you choose, but the cup is the same no matter what it contains. Don't you agree? I nodded and waited for her to clarify her point. Nelida explained that once a person has recapitulated and has acquired detachment, their energy body no longer shivers every time the world moves around them, because they are empty and allow intent to move them. They have a center that is constant and seemingly does not move at all. Didn't anyone teach you about maintaining the center? She asked, surprised. I told her that Clara and Emilito had taught me many things, including how to maintain one's equilibrium while climbing trees, in order not to get dizzy or nauseous when hanging upside down. By focusing the gaze on a specific point, it appears as if the world is moving while the body remains stationary. Nelida nodded when I had finished describing to her some of Emilito's tree climbing precepts. She picked up her cup and took a sip. Because the cup has no cracks, it can hold anything at all. You can empty it or fill it, and it is still the same cup. But if it had a crack in it, then you would notice the tea dripping out little by little until it was gone. Then the cup, if it could feel, would sense that it had lost something. I agreed that if it were in the nature of a cup to feel, that because of the crack and the tea trickling out, the cup would experience a sense of loss and might even feel unhappy, unfulfilled, or nostalgic about the past. That is because the cup is cracked, she said, peering at me. But if you seal the crack, then when the cup is filled and emptied, it would not sense a loss because it is the nature of a cup to be empty or full. While it is not in the nature of a functional cup to be cracked or broken. A cup that has a hole or no bottom can no longer function for what it was intended, that is, to be a container. I still don't understand what that has to do with anything. Nelida explained that if the energy body has holes in it or is injured, the person feels the drainage of the life force and tries to hold back the inevitable loss by hoarding and clinging. What a person doesn't realize is that it is not the fear of losing that makes him cling, but the weakness of his energetic being that is the cause of his turmoil. Nelida explained that all of us were like cups, some with cracks, others with no bottoms, while still others were strong and intact. The strong ones never cling or feel a loss when things leave them, Nelida said. Because regardless of whether they are empty or full, their essential nature remains intact. Such people can come and go without the burdensome attitudes of the weak, who cling to every crumb that comes their way, always fearing that someone might take it away. They are like beggars who scramble for crumbs because they feel they will never eat again. What can you do if you are a cup with a crack? I asked. Is there any hope for needy beggars? Recapitulate. Do the sorcery passes. Empty and restore your energy. Forget about the tea and the water, the fruit juice that you can't hold. Don't try to become filled again and again. It will only seep out and exacerbate your sense of loss. Dedicate all your energy to revitalization. Then, when you are strong again, it won't matter whether you are holding grapefruit juice or water. You can be empty or full, but you are never possessive about anything or afraid to let go. Why are you no longer possessive? I asked, feeling intoxicated from the aromatic tea. Because you know that it is not what fills you that is important, but your link with intent. Practice not doing. Empty your cup to seal it. Once it is energetically sealed, then you'll know nothing is lacking. Nelida explained that to be needy or greedy really means that one is energetically dependent on others for sustenance. Therefore, one is always at the mercy of someone else or begging for energetic handouts. But if you dip your cup into the vastness, then nothing can disturb or disappoint you. For then you are soaked in the source of all things. Then a person is never afraid of saying goodbye, for he or she knows that ultimately there is nothing to leave and no place to go. What about the saucers? I asked. Nelida laughed heartily, as if I had said something hilariously funny. Toss them out, she smiled. We have no use for saucers. It is better to rest upon the vastness itself. Nelida set her cup on the table and explained that to rest on the vastness means to forget oneself so completely that there is no difference between oneself and one's surroundings. Then the world conforms to our intent. When we take no notice of ourselves, then our timing is perfect. Then we no longer know whether we are moving or being moved. Then the unfathomable guides and guards our being. But first, we must rely on our impeccability, Nelida said. Empty your cup through the recapitulation so you won't have the sensation of draining and losing. Then, while you are empty, you repair the damages to your energy body through the sorcery passes. Finally, after you are energetically sound and you are clear and at ease with yourself and others, then you can begin to spread that ease and clarity to all your enterprises and encounters. No matter what arises, a stalker will be able to handle it with the ease and delight that springs from the depth of not being. What if the people I'm with are nervous and unhappy? I asked, carefully setting my cup down on the table. Nelida filled it with more of the delicious tea. Wouldn't I be contaminated by their negative moods? I was thinking of an incident that happened not long ago in the anthropology department. I was riding up the elevator when Tim Howard, a graduate student, corralled me and, in an aggressive manner, asked, "How come you're always smiling? Did you discover the source of happiness?" I became flustered. Immediately, I began explaining that I didn't realize I was always smiling, and demanded to know how feeling happy could be offensive. But by the time we got to the third floor, I was thoroughly depressed and depleted of energy. If you exude ease and delight from the depth of your being, you will contaminate others, Nelida assured me. What if they are so strong that they sway me? I insisted. There is no way anyone can affect a stalker, because his warrior's purpose cannot be swayed. Now, if you are cracked, or are on the lookout to be liked, or are investing and expecting payoffs, then everything seeps out or in and can affect you. As in the elevator, all your energy moves to the place of the damage to repair it, but to no avail. For you cannot hold or change anything, nor can you seal anything when you are so full of yourself. But a complete nature holds itself within itself. It needs nothing added to it, nor can anything be taken away from it, not even the feelings of acquiring or losing. Nelida reached across the table to affectionately pat my hand. She assured me that after recapitulating, my energy body was fairly strong, and that was why she could talk to me. It was wrong for me to persist in feeling weak, merely out of habit. A person who is united with intent itself enjoys the company of others, but never clings or is needy, simply because her emptiness and fullness prevents her from knowing need or tenacity. Nelida explained that to fortify one's energy body entails changing one's behavior and giving up the feelings of desperation that serve no purpose. Where does one begin? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. Nelida smiled and said that the best way to consolidate one's energy body was through the recapitulation, resulting in a cleansing of the turmoil associated with daily existence. It is the dissolution of conflict and inner turmoil that puts the personal self to rest, Nelida said. It results in merging of one's inner and outer worlds, so that what one thinks and does and says are the same as what happens. It was getting dark. Nelida got up and pointed to the bed. Have a good rest. I'm going for a short walk. Adios. You mean hasta luego, don't you? I said. Nelida stood for a moment and smiled, then stepped out and closed the door behind her. When I awoke the next morning, Don Juan was standing in the doorway, peering at me. He said to get up, for it was time to leave. We climbed down the canyon by a different trail and hiked back to his house. As we walked, I was filled with a vibrant energy. I felt open, porous, and light. I wanted to ask him where Nelida had gone and to tell him all the things she had said and what had happened at the ruins, when he stopped me with a flick of his hand. Suddenly, I couldn't put my recollections into words. I knew some things could never be forced into words and had to remain at the level of silent knowledge. Carlos was waiting when we arrived at Don Juan's house. My heart leapt with relief at seeing him again. It had only been 3 days, but it seemed to have been forever. He did not ask where I had been. It was the riddle of the heart that Nelida had said I would take a lifetime to unravel. Looking into the new Nawal's bright, shiny eyes, I knew then it had to do with letting go of the self and of accepting the gifts the Spirit offered without question, without interfering. Chapter 18, Guadalajara. Carlos drove south on the Pan-American Highway. He kept his eyes on the road and did not relax his concentration at all during the long hours of driving. I offered to relieve him at the wheel, but he refused, saying that it was dangerous for the inexperienced driver to negotiate the curves on Mexican roads, and we needed to get to a large city as fast as safety would allow. As we drove, I had the feeling someone or something was following us, hovering outside on the passenger side. That feeling had made me so anxious that I had to struggle to keep my eyes open. I kept drifting off into a light sleep and found myself back in the Sonoran desert, floating over the chaparral. I could see rows of enormous agave cactus and clusters of tall saguaro, and the long brown lines of irrigation ditches. I knew something was wrong. I felt vaporous, as if I had no substance, or that the bulk of me was somewhere else. When I was awake, I was disoriented. I couldn't think and could hardly formulate a coherent answer to Carlos's questions. He was asking me about my studies, what courses I planned to take in the fall. That world was so distant that I couldn't remember the course titles, the professors' names, or people I had had contact with at the university. I was tripping over my words as if I were drunk or had a speech impediment. "You sound like my Turkish grandmother," Carlos said. "She would always mix up her P's and B's and twist words around. I used to be ashamed of her because I thought she had a heavy accent. But later I realized that she had aphasia." "Well, I don't have aphasia," I said, annoyed. "I just can't seem to focus my thoughts." Carlos turned off onto a shoulder on the road, stopped the car, and examined my pupils. He concluded that La Catalina had gotten a strong hold over me and that she wasn't about to let go. "What does she want with us?" I asked, my teeth shattering from an inner chill. "Your sudden visit and suspicious behavior was interpreted as an attempt to snatch her power," Carlos said. "She acted in the only way she knew how to defend herself from an inexplicable force." Carlos reiterated that we had to put even greater distance between us, and quickly too, for we had offended La Catalina by not making it plain who we were and why we had come to see her. "Why would she want to hurt us if she is part of Don Juan's group of sorcerers?" I asked. "It's not a question of what La Catalina wants," Carlos explained. "But once certain forces are set into motion, there is nothing she can do to retract them. It is like the recapitulation. Once your intent and breath are sent out, whoever happens to be in its path is done for." "Do you think she might retaliate against her will?" Carlos started the car again. "There's no way of knowing what she might do," he said. "Therefore, we must continue our journey and rally our power." When I asked Carlos how far south we were fleeing, he said we would keep driving until we ran out of power, or until something told us to stop. I had the gnawing suspicion that I had already run out of power. From the time of the gathering in the house in Sonora, where the fleas had attacked me, to the encounter with La Catalina, things had not turned out well. I rationalized these ill-fated outcomes as a result of not having been adequately prepared as to who these people were or what I was to expect. Had I been better informed, I would have handled the encounters with more finesse. Yet at the same time, I knew that in the sorcerer's world, the test of a warrior's mettle always came disguised, to see if one could act impeccably without warning or preparation, but simply from an inner conviction. It was late afternoon by the time we reached Guadalajara. Carlos parked the car near the Hotel de Mendoza, near the long park-like plaza Tapatia. We got out and walked to an area where there was a gazebo set on a raised platform, with steps leading up to it that served as a stage. An orchestra had assembled. The musicians seemed to be preparing to play, for they were warming up their violins and trumpets. A good-sized crowd had gathered to hear the concert and to stroll along the walkways of the park. Massive colonial-style buildings surrounded the park. To the west was the Degollado Theater, the home of the Philharmonic Orchestra of Jalisco. Further on, we could see parts of the government palace. Streets veered off in various directions from the central plaza. To my left was an enormous building with carved wooden doors opening to a series of steps. It seemed to be a government building of some kind, with a statue of a man riding a horse in front of a fountain. Carlos wanted to head for the statue. "Can we stay to listen to the concert?" I asked. Carlos nodded. We looked for a bench where we could sit and listen to the music, but they were all occupied by families and young couples. I realized we were not in the best spot to listen to the orchestra. The place was packed with old men with walking sticks, grandmothers looking after boisterous children, and young women who were parading before the appreciative stares of young men. The paths were crowded, too, with vendors selling balloons, artificial flowers, and pinwheels. Other stands and carts were selling cotton candy, fruit, ice cream, and all kinds of wares, including canaries in small cages. We stood for a while, waiting for the orchestra to begin. In the distance, I could see the twin towers of the cathedral. It was a striking mixture of Byzantine, Gothic, and Arabic styles. Carlos said that the 200-foot towers were erected in 1848, after an earthquake had destroyed the original structures. The towers were beautifully decorated with yellow and blue tiles that glistened in the afternoon sun. In the opposite direction across the park, east according to my compass, there were 3-story houses with bars covering the windows. Flowering geranium pots and other plants graced the 2nd-story balconies, accessed by beautiful French doors opening out to them. One house in particular caught my attention. Its shutters were freshly painted blue. It seemed to exude vitality from every stone. Compared to it, the other houses seemed drab and old. "The orchestra is about to start playing," Carlos said, taking my arm. "Shall we walk around the plaza to find a better spot?" We began to stroll, but I grew more and more uneasy. I had the unsettling sensation that I was being followed, or that someone I couldn't see was watching me. I grew self-conscious, irritable, for I knew whoever it was scrutinizing me at a deep level. I had all but forgotten La Catalina in the excitement of the park. But this was something else, having nothing to do with La Catalina's reprisals. I looked at the people seated, or the ones standing on the benches, so they could see the musicians, but I didn't recognize anyone. I saw children with their mothers, teenagers out on dates, an elderly woman and a gentleman. Then there was a strong and attractive middle-aged woman carrying a mesh shopping bag full of parcels. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The band had begun playing. They sounded out of tune. They were playing the Vienna Waltz by Strauss, which had been one of my mother's favorite pieces. She had played it over and over on the piano so that it had become ingrained in my memory. I was mulling over as to how it ought to be played when a man approached Carlos and began talking to him. At first, I didn't pay any attention, for I was engrossed in finding fault with the musicians. But when I turned and saw the familiar face, almost completely hidden by a sombrero, my mouth fell open. "Emelito," I cried, "what are you doing here? Is it really you?" We stood there for a moment staring at each other. Tears came to my eyes, for I had thought I would never see him again. "Indulging as usual," he said, and winked devilishly. "Have you been practicing what I taught you?" "I haven't been," I confessed, "but I'm going to the university, as you recommended." Emelito nodded. He whispered something to Carlos, who suddenly excused himself, saying he had an errand to run, but that he would join up with us later. I was so happy to see Emelito that I barely heard what Carlos was saying. I started to follow him as he left, but Emelito grabbed my arm to stop me. "Let him go, dear. Don't you like my company?" He sounded actually peeved, like a child who was about to be abandoned. He prodded me in the opposite direction, towards another bench, some distance away from the orchestra. I turned to see if I could catch sight of Carlos, to ask him not to leave me alone in an unknown city, but he had already disappeared in the crowd. "You'll see him later," Emelito assured me. "Now, what about your practice of stalking with the double?" "What do you mean?" "Stalking with the double," he repeated, with an exasperated click of his tongue. "Have you been practicing it?" I was at a loss as what to say. I tried to remember what he had taught me with respect to that subject, but my mind was a mass of confusion. I looked at his wide lemur-like eyes and noted the disappointment in them. I wanted to say that I understood what he meant and that I was practicing diligently every day, but that would have been dishonest. So I said, "I don't honestly know if I've been stalking with the double." He recommended that I lean back on the bench, close my eyes, and try to remember what he had taught me on the subject. Remember how to find things, how to get things done, how to move things with the force stemming from inner silence and beyond, he suggested. I closed my eyes and tried to settle my erratic breathing. Then, as I drifted off into a restful state, I remembered something that Emelito had said long ago while I was living in the trees under his care. I had complained that since I could not leave the treehouse, which had been our agreement, I was unable to practice the martial art forms Clara had taught me. For that, I needed plenty of space, and preferably a hardwood floor. "Practice martial arts with your double," Emelito had recommended. "That's the best sort of practice anyway." "How do I practice martial arts with my double when I can't even leave the treehouse?" I asked. Emelito had laughed, and to my amazement, had executed a series of the most graceful and impossible bodily movements I had ever seen. Right there, beneath the treehouse, Emilito had flipped backwards and then laterally in circles, rotating his body in a horizontal plane like a frisbee. And I knew he wasn't using pulleys or ropes or extra fast film to speed up his movements, as they did in martial art movies, to give the impression of actors defying gravity. Watching Emilito's superb movements from the treehouse was sheer delight. Why hadn't he taught me before? I lamented. Now that I couldn't leave the trees, it was too late to learn how to spin in the air. Practice these movements with your double, he had repeated again, and showed me the lateral spinning motion. But how do I practice that without falling out of the tree? I asked. Use your imagination and intend it, he said. Intent, 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 he called out in a shrill bird-like squawk as we walked toward the house. That night, and all the subsequent nights for several weeks before falling asleep, I visualized the movements Emilito had demonstrated. I saw myself doing them over and over until I found myself doing them in my dreams. With some practice, my dream body could move any way I willed it to. I found I could do the most elaborate flips and backbends. I could leap from the ground to the treehouse and back down again in a single bound, using not pulleys and ropes, but the energy from my midsection. And I could do a thing I had always wanted to do, but could never accomplish with my waking body, no matter how hard I stretched. And that was touching my chin to my toes. After that, Emilito would show me movements on a regular basis, which I would then practice first by visualizing them, and then by repeating them over and over until I could do them in my dreaming. I opened my eyes and told Emilito what I had remembered. That while I was in the treehouse, I practiced long sequences of movements, putting the gravity-defying techniques that he had shown me together in new patterns, so that every night I would dream of doing combinations of movement. That's stalking with the double, Emilito said, pleased. That's sending out the double as a scout to put things in order. Then when you do it, it's a cinch, because the energy has already been deployed to produce a certain effect. The rest follows by itself. I realized that in spite of my reason, that was the way I did practically everything, from practicing martial art movements to writing a term paper, or giving a report in a class, or designing a dress, or composing a poem, or cooking a stew. Following the pattern I had learned under Emilito's tutelage, I always set up the form at night in a quiet, restful state. I laid the foundation and imagined myself going through the motions of doing that particular thing. For example, if I were going to make a dress, I would go through all the steps in the exact order I needed to do them. I would see myself selecting the proper material, folding it, cutting it, taking the pieces in their proper order, and sewing them together. I would see which way would be better and make changes if I needed to, repeating the sequence in a different order. A voice would tell me if there was a better way of doing it. And when I had it completed in the most economical an efficient way, whenever I felt it was the proper time, I would allow the activity to unfold to its completion. It was as if the thing were already done, and I was only the agent, silently going through the motions of its execution. The same thing would happen if I had to give a report in one of my classes. I would visualize myself writing the paper while in a light sleep. Or rather, I would blank my mind and something would isolate a topic and tell me how to organize it in the most precise and understandable manner. When it was arranged, I would put it down on paper exactly as I had written it with my dream body. I realized that the years of recapitulation had enabled me to visualize in detail entire scenes and long sequences with no difficulty at all. Something would tell me what to say or do, and I would see and hear myself saying and doing it. Then, when it came time to give the report or do the activity, I proceeded as if it were already completed. Stalking with the double comes in handy when you're going to school, Emilito said after I had explained to him how I proceeded. It bypasses thought and goes directly to the source of energy that enables us to act most efficiently. I guess I do use intent, I said. If I need to find something, like a specific blouse to match a skirt, say out loud, I need a blouse, or find me the perfect blouse. And the force out there puts it in front of me by making me encounter it sometime during the course of events. I don't have to do anything. It brings it to me. Emilito said that was the art of stalking. To reach the point when one does nothing but allows the power of intent to alter reality so subtly that the intended items appear as elements in one's daily life. It is a harmonious process of changing perception via the force of intent. Something so mysterious and subtle that it seems as if it comes out of nowhere. Emilito stressed that the force only responds if one is impeccable in one's daily life, and if no one has no attachment to things. Feelings of desperation, or clinging, or greed, or need will thwart the free-flowing energy required for intent to respond to one's silent bidding. You must not be that unimpeccable, Emilito said. If you can stalk with the double using the power of intent, or perhaps you are the apple of someone's eye and someone is lending you their power. What do you mean? I asked. Who would be lending me their power? Nelida? I'm not talking about Nelida, Emilito said. She watches over you to see that you don't stray from the path. This sounds like something different. He sniffed the air a couple of times, as if trying to determine something. In fact, he sniffed in all directions, as if he were smelling something intangible. What are you doing, Emilito? I asked. Did I forget to put on deodorant this morning? I wouldn't know about that, he said. I'm interested in determining who is lending you their power. Perhaps it's Mr. Abelar, the Nahual Juan Matis, or the new Nahual, Carlos. Juan Matis is your teacher, true? Emilito said. But he is pretty miserly with his power. He wouldn't lend it for the hell of it. And Carlos is in charge of leading you to freedom. But this smells like something else. Like someone has made you a gift, and you don't even know it. All of a sudden, I was afraid, sensing something that was beyond words. It was so dark that it came from the darkness itself. Someone has been teaching you things at night, Emilito announced, like an oracle. And I know who it must be. Who, Emilito? Tell me. It's not up to me to spill the beans, he said. If your true benefactor wants to reveal himself, then so be it. If not, let it remain a secret. At the mere mention of the word secret, I registered a chill. My whole body shivered from the marrow of my bones outward. I experienced what Don Juan had called the warrior's shiver. He said it happens when a force moves the ethereal body directly and so powerfully that it is then registered by the physical body. Can you tell me who you're referring to, Emilito? Now I'm scared to even go to sleep at night. And you should be, he said seriously. Someone has been showing you how to manipulate intent, but not merely from the treetops, but from the deepest levels of the beyond. So, how come I don't remember or even know what you're talking about? I asked. How come I'm still such a shitbird? Because that someone is teaching your double directly. Very sneaky. He must come while you're in a profound sleep. That's why you don't remember. And that's why you can't afford to be so indulging. If you had a bit more energy, you would be aware, and you would know who I'm talking about, because your double already knows him intimately. Him? Is it a he? I had still thought it might be Nelida. But whenever she comes in my dreams, I am usually aware of her presence. There is nothing secretive about her. On the contrary, she is open and light-hearted, almost to the point of being nurturing in an indifferent sort of way. This other force sounded all too sinister. I didn't relish the idea that someone or something was manipulating my energy in my sleep, and especially not a male figure. Sinister is right, Emilito said with such an exaggerated warrior shiver that his body vibrated from head to toe. It was so comical that I laughed out of sheer nervousness. The real mystery is why would he be all that interested in the likes of you? I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Nobody is interested in me. That's just the trouble. I'm really an inconsequential piece of shit, overlooked by everyone. I said that with all the self-pity I could muster, for I felt I had been abandoned by Emilito, Nelida, Clara, and Don Juan. Now, tree dweller, let's have none of that self-pity crap, Emilito said with a nudge that almost pushed me off the bench. No one's abandoned you. You have your own path, and it's not here with us. Whatever we teach you has to be to your dream body or double, and you don't have to be in Mexico for that. Why not? A stupid question, Emilito said. Because as you know very well, the dream body is not bound by space and time. We can meet anywhere and any time, even the city of the angels. The way he said that had made Los Angeles sound utterly enchanting. I know that, Emilito. What I meant was, why do you have to teach the double? Why can't you just teach my physical body directly, the way you used to? Why can't I stay here in Guadalajara with you? Emilito gave me a mock look of horror. What do you have in mind? He said, moving to his side of the bench. And what makes you think I ever taught your physical body? Do you know something that I don't? No, I don't mean it like that. I know you're beyond all that male-female crap, and so am I. I just don't like being in Los Angeles by myself, so far from all of you. You're not by yourself, now that you have met Carlos, the young Nawal, Emilito said. He will look out for you, and the rest of us are always aware of your presence. You mean you see me? Of course, we see your energy body, and we know your innermost thoughts. He raised an eyebrow and shook his head. So you'd better continue recapitulating. The stronger your intent gets, the purer you have to be. I told Emilito about something that had been troubling me. I had a part-time job in a typing pool while going to school. And every time I parked my car to go to work, a young man, slightly retarded and perhaps homeless, would be waiting on the corner, asking if he could clean my windshields for some money. For a while, I simply let him clean them and gave him a few dollars in return. But since I drove there 4 or 5 times a week, I didn't need my windshield cleaned each time, so I would say no thank you. Sometimes I felt sorry for him and gave him some money anyway, especially after he had told me he had to be careful about what he ate because he suffered from stomach ulcers. The thought that he had bleeding ulcers, the way my older brother had as a teenager, made the situation all the more poignant. I wanted to give him all the money I had. Yet at the same time, I was on a tight student's budget and had to watch what I spent. And I didn't want my windows cleaned, so I was at a loss what to do. It got to the point that I dreaded driving up to the parking lot of my work, for I did not want to see this person. To avoid encountering him, I went so far as to park down the street, but he would find me anyway on my way home. He would say, "There's my lady friend," in such a pleasant tone that made me feel like a rat if I didn't give him any money, and angry if I did. I became so guilty and annoyed with this routine that one day I stopped in my tracks when I was out of sight and said in a loud voice, "Enough is enough. I don't ever want to see that person again." The next day, I was relieved to see that the young man wasn't on the street corner. But I didn't think anything of it, expecting to see him there the next day. But I didn't. I thought he was on vacation, although where or how I couldn't fathom. After a week of not seeing him, I was afraid he might be ill and felt doubly guilty. As time went on, the young man didn't return. In fact, I never saw him again. When I finished my account, Emilito shook his head. "Now I'm certain that someone has been teaching you to stalk with the double. Those things don't just happen just like that." "What do you think happened to that man, Emilito?" I asked, feeling alarmed. Why didn't he ever come back? "It makes no difference what happened to him," Emilito said. "He may have gone on vacation the way you would have liked to believe. Or maybe he was hit by a car while washing a windshield. Or perhaps he moved to a street corner where business was better. Or maybe he died of his ulcers or of malnutrition. Whatever happened to him is not the issue here. What are you saying? I asked. What is the issue? The fact that you never laid eyes on him again means that you were capable of altering the flow of intent. By voicing your desire, you moved something. Your intent moved that young man away from that street corner. How or to what it was moved, I didn't want him to come to any harm, I protested. I just didn't want him to keep bothering me. You yourself said that a stalker should never be subject to routines. And giving him money every time I saw him was a routine. That's precisely what I'm saying. You were able to disrupt a routine by altering the flow of intent. That is stalking with the double. And someone has been teaching you how to do that. I still don't think it had anything to do with me, I said. It could have been coincidence. He probably had somewhere else to go. Call it coincidence, witchcraft, sorcery, or whatever you like, Emilito said. The point is that you never saw the young man again. Who gives a fig what the reason is or what explanation you want to use? Your uneasiness is an indication that you had something to do with it, whether you are aware of it or not. Who do you think is teaching me this? I asked, still not convinced. I already told you, it's not for me to say, he replied. But there is another secret that I could reveal to you if you follow me. I'd rather wait for Carlos to come back, if it's all the same to you, I said, afraid of what Emilito might reveal to me. The orchestra had stopped playing long ago. Emilito popped up from the bench and said we could not wait for Carlos to return. It was getting dark, and he wanted to take me to meet his friend, who lived in a house nearby. He pointed to the west and said that if we craned our necks, we could see the house from where we were standing. I could see the corner of a wooden balcony. It was only a bit of railing that showed, and the rest was covered by the adjacent buildings. To my surprise, he was pointing to the house behind the one on the corner. The house that had the balcony with flowers. The one I had liked so much upon arriving at the plaza. Who lives there? I asked. And are you sure Carlos will be there waiting for us? A beautiful lady, Emilito said. And I'm absolutely certain Carlos will be there. But will he be waiting for us? I very much doubt it. He's probably enjoying himself too much. He said that with a wolf-like wink that implied all sorts of devilish things. I experienced a wave of jealousy that was too obvious to hide. Emilito shook his head, for he knew he had hit a sore spot. From his chuckle, I could tell he had been deliberately putting my claim to being detached as a woman to the test. I failed miserably. We walked to the house in silence. He had such a sprightly, sure gait that I had to make an effort to keep up with him, so I would not get lost in the crowd and end up in an unknown place. Along the way, he said that he had something that he wanted to show me, something only for the eyes of the double or dream body, and that we had to hurry, for twilight was the best time to witness such sights.